Hello, and welcome to the Exam Writing Workshop. My name is Emma Sylvester, and I'm the coordinator as well as a writing tutor at the St. Mary's University Writing Center within Academic Learning Services. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about exam prep, some general overview ideas to apply to exam studying, but mostly I'm going to talk about strategies within the exam itself, whether it's a midterm or a final exam, and how we can write efficiently and succeed within these high-pressure and sometimes high-stakes examinations. In anything we do, the first step, of course, is to be prepared. Preparing for an exam, of course, means studying, which we'll talk about shortly, but that is focused on the content of the exam, right? The things that you've learned, what you have to know. But there's also the aspect of preparing outside of the content, the sort of meta preparation. And sometimes this happens automatically, but it's important not to overlook it. And this kind of big picture preparation is being sure that you're aware of all of the aspects of the exam, when it's taking place, as well as where it's taking place, what particular platform might be used, and how does that platform work? Are you able to go back and look at previous questions, or are they frozen and once you move forward, you can't go back again? That is sometimes a factor of online examinations, and it's important to know so that you can prepare accordingly. It's also important to have your environment set up ahead of time for this exam. So maybe you know when it is, but do your roommates or anybody else that you live with, do they know when it is? Do they know that it's not a time that you can be interrupted? Being sure that your space is ready and that you're ready mentally for the exam is also really important in this sort of preparation and planning to prepare phase. It's also really important that you're aware of how the exam will work, not just technically, but what types of questions are there? Are you looking at a series of multiple choice questions? Are there short answer or long answer or maybe essay questions? Is there a combination of all of the above? Knowing the outline of the exam is also really important for being prepared. And of course, what is permitted for this exam? Some examinations are totally open book, some are not. Some you're allowed to prepare a one-page cheat sheet in advance. And of course, that would be a part of your studying, but you want to make sure that those are also aspects that you've taken into consideration in preparation for this time. So once you're clear on all of this meta information for your exam, it's time to start making a study schedule. It's important to make sure that you know those details and facts about the exam first because they will inform your study approach. Now it's time to start thinking about mastering the content. To start off, make a study schedule. I find it easier in terms of my time management to look at when the exam actually is and plan backwards from there. I find it helpful to schedule actual chunks of time and assign content from the course that will be covered in that time. It might not mean you'll get to everything depending on the difficulty level or maybe the size of that module, but it's good to have a general aim for what you'd like to cover within each allotted study period. You might also want to get as specific as scheduling down to the minute. You could use something like a Pomodoro method where you have 25 minutes of studying and then 5-minute breaks alternating. And it might be beneficial for you to plan what you will study within each of these 25-minute intervals. Be sure not to just memorize aimlessly. Focus on key facts, quotes, and statistics that have been highlighted within your course. Look at central concepts and important theories and significant examples. Through your course, you'll probably get some hints about whether something will be on the exam, how it might be on the exam. Make sure that you take note of this throughout the semester and that you have that to reflect back on to inform your studying. Look for patterns and connections between ideas. Use concept maps, flowcharts, or a brainstorm to consider cause and effect and how ideas relate to each other. That might look at a historical perspective or maybe a logical flow. And lastly, anticipate questions. Given what you know about the course content, as well as the structure of the exam, what questions might the professor ask? How much time was spent on each topic? Generally, the focus that has been spent and the energy that has been spent on a specific topic will be reflected in the exam as well. Also consider what hasn't been tested. Depending on how many exams you have in a course, usually something that has already been tested on might still be included in a subsequent exam, but it won't be as important. It won't be as highlighted. So it's important to direct your energies and your focus accordingly in order to prepare for the upcoming exam. One thing that I always like to make note of is to be creative in your studying. I mentioned flowcharts and mind maps before, and whatever sort of creative project or approach to studying that feels right for you, follow that intuition. If you find some joy and if you can find some motivation through the process of studying, rather than it just being like a boring, repetitive, rewriting notes kind of process, if you can engage with the method, then you'll be far more likely to engage with the content as well. So maybe you want to use Post-it notes on a wall and create a big map that way. Maybe you want to make a little notebook that follows a structure for each of the units. Whatever approach feels best for you, follow that and use that momentum. Okay. I'm now going to talk about each of the different types of questions that we see on exams and break down approaches for each of them. So first up, let's look at multiple choice. A multiple choice question is presented as a STEM, followed by 3 to 5 options to complete it. And there are some basic steps that we can use to answer multiple choice questions efficiently. First, cover the options and consider your answer to the question. Before you even see what they are, if you have an idea of an answer, that'll help you to select the correct one and not to get distracted by the incorrect ones. Next up, look at the questions, or look at the answers, of course, and eliminate the options you know are wrong. Then it's time to evaluate the remaining choices. At this point, you might have already landed on the correct answer and you're good to move on. But if you have 2 or maybe 3 that you're debating between, there are a couple other sort of deductive approaches that we can use. First, treat each option as a true or false question. If you just read the STEM with one of your possible answers and you can answer true or false to it, that'll help inform your approach as you move forward. Be suspicious of answers that seem unfamiliar. Sometimes I think really unfamiliar answers can dig into our insecurities about feeling like we don't know enough about the topic, but trust your gut. If something seems unfamiliar, it probably is. Be suspicious of absolutes like always and never. These can be quite tricky. Compare similar or opposite responses. If you have something that looks identical but only one word is changed, or maybe the order of the possible answers are changed, consider what the meaning is and allow that to inform what seems like the best answer. Resolve double negatives before testing responses. So if the STEM includes a not in it and the answer includes a not or does not, then be sure to resolve that so that you have a clear understanding of the meaning of the STEM with the answer that follows. Check to make sure the grammar fits. This isn't always a foolproof approach, but if a possible answer doesn't fit the STEM grammatically, it might indicate that it's not correct. And lastly, if 2 responses seem correct, check each with the STEM. So go through this process with each of them. A couple more key tips here. Answer questions you are 100% sure of first. I have an asterisk here because depending on the platform for your online exam, it might not be possible to go back to questions that you're unsure of. But if it's possible, answer those first ones that you're positive of. That will help you feel a little bit more confident as you move forward, and it also saves you some time. Cross out alternatives that you know are wrong. I mentioned earlier to eliminate the answers that you know are incorrect, but make sure that you actually physically cross them out so you don't get distracted by them and waste time on them moving forward. And cover the answers so that you can focus on the question. And remember that you're looking for the best answer. It might not necessarily be the perfect answer. I'm going to go through a couple examples and discuss how these approaches can be applied. So in this first question here, I'm looking at a history question. Many historians divide the French Revolution, minus Napoleon's rule, into these distinct stages. Okay, so right off the bat, I have these 5 options. All of them are simply lists, so grammatically everything fits. At first, if I read answer A, the Great Fear, the Reign of Terror, and the Directory, none of that sounds familiar to me from my class, so I'm going to say that's probably not it. Next, I see the monarchy, the republic, and the empire, the radical, the moderate, and the reactionary, the moderate, the radical, and the reactionary, and the storming of the Bastille, of the Tuileries, of the National Convention. So in E, I see events that did happen, but they're not the actual names of the stages. And if I look at C and D, these are very similar answers, and they do sound familiar to me. The only difference is the order. So that tells me that not only do I need to know the actual names of the stages, but I need to be familiar with the order of them. Now, if I remember back to my classes, I know that the moderate came before the radical. So it was moderate and then radical and then the reactionary or conservative stage. So in this case, I would guess D. And that's just an example of some of the approaches that can be taken for each of these questions and each of these answers. Next up, what are the main features of a culture? I see customs and norms, history and religion, language and ethnicity, and D, all of the above. I think there is a tendency to want to answer all of the above when in doubt, but always make sure that you go through each of the answers and make sure that they do actually apply. One benefit of an all of the above answer is that if even one of the other answers above doesn't fit, then I can automatically eliminate the all of the above answer as well. So I really just need to be able to eliminate one to eliminate two possible options and cut my options down in half. For this question, though, I would say that all of these are main features of a culture. So I would answer all of the above. And here I have a sort of science-based question. Which of the following is not a laboratory safety rule? Now, in the previous two examples, I didn't really demonstrate this, but we could have thought about the answer to the question before we actually looked at the possible options themselves. In this case, though, that's not really available to us, because there are lots of laboratory safety rules and it really depends on the possible answers given. So if I go through these options, I see you should never mix acids with bases. Right off the bat, I see that word never, that's superlative, and I'm a little bit suspicious of that one. B, you should tie back your long hair. That definitely is a safety rule, and so therefore that's not an option, because we're looking for one that is not a safety rule. C, you should never add water to acid. Now, I know this little quip that says, do what you oughta, add acid to water, so I know that I shouldn't add water to acid. So that is a valid safety rule. So B and C, I know are valid. D, all of the above are, so it could be D depending on this A. Now that never I mentioned I was kind of suspicious of. Usually we wouldn't just add acids with bases, but it really depends on the experimentation. A chemical titration is based on mixing acids and bases. And so that's not really a laboratory safety rule because of that never. So I would say here the answer is A, because that's not a valid safety rule because it depends on the context. Students sometimes find multiple choice questions a bit overwhelming, but I would really just recommend slowing it down, taking the time to really break down the question and read the details that are within every word of the stem as well as the possible answers before you move on, and trying not to get overwhelmed by all of the possible answers. In the case of short and long answer questions, we have a bit of a different approach. Now, it's important to give brief answers, but be complete. And the length of what brief means will be dependent on the question itself. So first, read each question carefully. I'd mentioned that just now for multiple choice, but it's really important for short and long answer questions as well to make sure that you're addressing everything that is being asked of you. Look for the main idea and try and recall where that idea came from within the context of the rest of the information in the course. Underline key terms or concepts in the questions and use them in the answer. That also means always write in complete sentences. Be specific and to the point. Support answers with examples. Remember that this is not an essay question, so you don't need to have a whole outline for your paragraph structure. You don't need to have an introduction and a conclusion. You just need to get to the point immediately. And consider the number of points the question is worth for guidance. Most of the time within the question itself, the phrasing will indicate quite clearly where each of the points come from. You might be asked, to describe a key term or concept and provide an example. And maybe that's worth 3 points. So my guess there is that there's 2 points for the description and the concept, depending on how many factors there are that are involved in that concept. And then there would be 1 point for the example. So look at the number of points to indicate how many points you have to make and how long your answer should be. For both short and long answer questions, as well as essay questions, it would be beneficial to have a scrap paper with you so that you can jot down the answers and the points you want to make before you just go into writing. This will help you stay on topic, stay focused, and give direct answers. When it comes to essay writing, a lot of planning is needed in advance, and so that scrap piece of paper will be even more important. Essays should be written using the 5-paragraph essay format. It doesn't necessarily need to be 5 paragraphs, but the key here is that we have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. We often think of the body as including 3 paragraphs, hence 5-paragraph format, but ultimately, if your essay has more body paragraphs or even fewer, as long as you address the essay question that is being asked of you, that's generally totally fine. An introduction needs to include a thesis statement, and for exam essays, we want to make sure that thesis statement is within the first few sentences. We do want to open with a general topic sentence still, but we want to get to that thesis statement quite quickly. Try to include terms or wording that are in the question, much like short and long answer questions. Clarify or define key concepts. It's good to show that you are aware of any sort of jargon that you're using. And include a mapping scheme that outlines the main points that you will use. So it outlines for the reader where you are going as an overview of the whole essay itself. Within body paragraphs, we know that there needs to be 1 body paragraph for each point in the introduction. So this is where that planning needs to come in advance. You need to know the outline of your essay, so what each body paragraph will contain, so that it can be introduced comprehensively in the introduction. Stick to 1 claim or topic per paragraph, and be sure that each of those claims is supported by evidence. Examples can work really great here. And use transitions between your paragraphs so that there's some flow while reading it. In your conclusion, restate your thesis statement and your supporting arguments. This can feel a little bit repetitive. It is important that it's not just a carbon copy of your introduction. I often think of a conclusion as telling the reader, now that you know the information that I've given you, now that you've heard my arguments, what can we think of it? So we go back into the overall thesis statement, but we're thinking in a wider scope again. We're thinking forward. So with that said, in your conclusion, don't introduce any new ideas or evidence, and make sure that you include a statement of significance, why the topic is important, what kind of influence it has, what it means thinking into the future. In general, avoid a knowledge dump. Don't just write everything that you know on the topic. Usually an essay question will kind of lead to a clear thesis, so make sure that you stay with your thesis topic and you continue to argue the argument that you are making. Don't guess any details. The professor is not expecting the same work that you could do at home, and a wrong guess could lose points. So let's say you don't remember, a specific year something happened with Napoleon. It's better not to guess the specific year. Instead say, late 18th century. That's totally fine. That's accurate, and you don't need that level of detail. Make sure you have an introduction. It's important to give structure to the essay and helps the professor to see where to give you points, as well as to see where you're going. And, of course, include a conclusion. This completes the essay form and demonstrates that you understand why the topic is important in your field. Essay writing within the context of an exam can be pretty overwhelming, but if you slow down and really use the time to outline your thoughts and get them down point by point, it'll be direct and you'll do great. I mentioned that it's important to know what type of questions you'll be answering in your exam, because that will inform how you study. It also informs how you take the exam, if you have all multiple choice or if you're looking at a combination of these types of questions. Think about the types of questions that you'll be answering and the type of information that you need to be informed to answer each of these questions in preparation for your exam. and I'm going to talk a bit about general overview of strategies in conquering and taking this final boss, the exam itself. These categories aren't mutually exclusive, but it's important in your exam to preview, plan, and budget. So preview. Take the first 5 minutes to read over the test. Really. And again, that's if it's an option. Sometimes you might have 10 pages that are split up in the online format of your exam, and you might only be able to look at one at a time and not go backwards. But if you can click through them, do so. Take a look at what those questions are. It can really help you calm down at the beginning of a test. Read the directions and understand what is being asked in each section. Identify how the points are divided so you know where to focus your time. And only answer the easiest questions on the first reading, again if this is an option. You'll follow that up by answering harder questions in the order of their importance to your grade. I mentioned that answering the questions that you feel confident about early on can help with your confidence in taking the rest of the test. I've also experienced that sometimes answering questions that you know can help inform questions that you're not so sure of later on, especially in a multiple choice setting. So allow that to happen and allow yourself to become more familiar with the test as you calm down and as you go through the questions. When you plan, make a mental note on section priorities. Ask yourself, if I don't have time to do everything, what has to get done? Where do you need to spend the most time? And this will be informed based on the grades that each section is worth. It might also be informed by what you struggle with the most. So maybe you think that a lot of the multiple choice questions you can breeze through, but you have a couple long answer questions that will be a little bit harder. So take that into account. You might want to break up the time evenly based on points, but then say, actually, I think I should probably give myself 10 minutes more in this section than I would in this other section. So take into consideration your own strengths and weaknesses. If they can be done quickly, the easier questions can be done first. And budget. After assessing the exam, determine how you will spend your time. Different exams require different strategies. So with multiple choice, all questions have the same value, and you need to finish as many as possible. You will absolutely need to allocate more time for longer questions worth more marks. I would say even sometimes a short answer question worth 5 points might take longer than answering 5 multiple choice questions. It really depends on your familiarity with the content as well as the questions itself. So try to stick to your budget. If you have 3 essays, each worth 33%, a brilliant job on one won't make up for not finishing the other 2. So be sure that you're actually watching the clock and don't be afraid to move on. If there's time, you can come back. So if you're at the 1/3 mark time-wise and you're still not finished that first essay, that's all right. It's time to move on, and it's better to go back and add a finishing touch than it is to not complete an entire essay question. Try not to leave any questions blank. Partial credit is better than no credit. So if you don't get to write that concluding paragraph in your essay, even if you have a point-by-point outline of what was going to be in your conclusion, you might get some part marks for it, and at the very least, you'll have most of the essay finished. I'm going to mention again just how important it is to slow down in this writing and exam process. It can be difficult because it feels, like you're in a time constraint. It can be stressful, but the more you slow down and the more that you allow your thoughts to come to you as they do, generally the better that you will do. When you've gone through the majority of these steps and most of your exam is answered, or you have 10 minutes left, double check that you've answered all the questions fully, or as many as you have been able to answer fully. Read over your answers before you hand in to see if you need to add or clarify. Don't second guess your responses without good reasons, and don't feel rushed. So there can be a tendency to go back to questions and say, actually, I'm not so sure about this. But if you felt confident at the beginning, go with your gut. Usually those second guesses, unless you've had sort of a stroke of insight midway through the exam, and you're like, oh man, I definitely didn't answer that one correctly. Unless you have that kind of positive assurance and you can really justify why you would change your answer, generally I would avoid not doing so. With these notes, it might also be good when you are allotting the time to give yourself 15 minutes at the end of the exam for review. So instead of giving a whole third for that first one of 3 essay questions. Maybe you want to give a quarter of the amount of time that you have so that you have a final quarter to review. Before I go, I just want to say that you've absolutely got this. If at any time you want to talk to a Writing Center tutor about exam writing or exam studying, while we often help students with writing assignments, we also look at these other aspects of academia as well. So you're more than welcome to meet up with us to chat about exam studying and writing strategies that work for you. We also run a regular event called Study Hall, which is a virtual meeting. Students from any field can join. And in this space, it's sort of an open space for students to get tips on anything to do with writing assignments or upcoming exams. And it's also just an open space for people to work together and connect with other peers and connect with Writing Center staff and be accountable to each other. It's kind of like a writing group with some space for personalized conversation and strategy discussion as well. Information on upcoming workshops, as well as study hall events, can be found on the Writing Center homepage, and you can book an appointment with a writing tutor at smu.mywconline.com. We are here for you to ensure your academic success. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck with the rest of your semester.